I'm Dr. Jaclyn Chasse. Welcome to Best Practice. Today I'm so excited because we have Michelle Strasburger with us, who's one of my very favorite people that I work with. Michelle is our HR director, so thankfully I only visit on social reasons and not too frequently because I'm sent to her office.
Not that scary.
But she's not that scary. But she is an amazing resource, and I've actually pinged Michelle quite a bit with questions about my own practice and stuff too. She's really savvy. And Michelle, you've been in businesses large and small, right?
Yes, so I've been in both Fortune 500s and in small organizations as small as a startup organization. So I've seen challenges from both larger organizations and smaller organizations, and they're the same. The challenges are really the same. It might be a different scale or just unique to that business, but they really are transferable across organizations. So regardless of the field, or the practice, like I know a lot of our practitioners have smaller businesses. They may struggle with the same things that larger businesses are.
I think we probably do. Yeah. And when I talk with my colleagues, I've had the same conversation over and over again with a lot of people, which is like, maybe you're a solo practitioner and you're getting a little bit too busy because you're running your own front desk and trying to return phone calls and seeing patients, and you're like, oh God, it's definitely time to hire someone into my practice. And whether it's your first hire or it's your fifth hire, whether it's a practitioner or it's a support staff, it's like a really intimidating process because I don't know, I've read the book Good to Great. Have you ever read that book before?
Love that book, yeah.
Love that book. And something that really stuck with me in that book is how he talks about the first thing about getting your business right is getting the right people on the bus. And I love that analogy. He basically describes the fact that even if you're not quite sure what role they're going to fill, it's so important to have the right team.
Right. It really is. And hiring is, no matter what you do, still a 50-50 shot because you have to get the person in and experience them. I'm a big believer that you should hire for a culture fit first and then skill set. Skills can be taught, but you can't always teach somebody to fit your organization. So I'd really think about whether it's your first hire or your 10th hire or something like that. Think about what's the culture you want in your practice, what's important for you and for your patients, because I'm sure your patients will talk to these people as well, and look for that first, and the skill set will follow. You can teach them how to use the computer and Excel and things like that, but you can't really teach behavior. That's
awesome that you said that, and I think that's going to really resonate with practitioners because we are a very cultured bunch. And so I think sometimes finding the right culture fit is probably a little bit different or more difficult than a lot of other businesses. I'll just leave it at that. We're really diverse and eclectic, and our needs are really different, right? So can we start, what I'm hoping we can do today is kind of walk people through the process of hiring. So I think about the beginning really being the consideration phase, when you're like, okay, I think that I need someone. And this is a business that doesn't really have a big HR department. What would be the first steps, even before you might post a listing, to help to figure out what it is you need, or what are the key things of your culture that you want to match? Where do you even begin when you're starting to think about it?
Yeah, I mean, brainstorming, if you have people on your team, utilizing them too. What are the pain points? If somebody was to walk in with a specific skill set that would make your day and make your life easier, what does that look like and what does that feel like? And start to jot some of that stuff down. It's hard, especially if it's your first hire, because you're doing all the work and it's working, and it's going to be hard to relinquish that and pass that on to somebody. And a lot of leaders have that challenge regardless of the industry that they're in. So what is it that you can start to part with and start to give to somebody and delegate and start to write those things down to build out a job description?
So it's like when you say it's hard to delegate, mostly it's because we're kind of all a little bit of control freaks and we like the way we do it. Is that really what you're talking about?
Right? Is you just need more help.
Yeah, you need someone who can do it as good as you can do it today.
Right.
Yeah, okay.
Right.
Good.
Yeah, it's hard. And there's a lot of great resources on there. And in today's world, it's not just posting and hoping, as I like to call it, where years ago when I first started in HR, you would put a job out on Monster or in the newspaper, or sometimes we would even advertise. Yeah, we would even advertise at the movie theaters for folks, which is really funny. Today it's all about who you know, and it's about your network. And I know that this industry has a strong network. I've heard that from a lot of folks here at Emerson. So lean on your network, because that's really important. And you don't have to reinvent the wheel. So who has hired for this type of position? Do you have a job description or a job posting? Can I steal it? Can I share it? Can I use it? And have you seen anybody, heard anybody looking for an opportunity?
That's a great point. And I know I've done that too, even here. Hopefully this is okay, but looking to hire in a new role, I will end up Googling other listings for that role and looking at the job descriptions that exist for other competitive positions to see how they word different aspects of the role and being able to see, like, would that be a fit for what I would want to put out there or not? So not knowing where to start, it can be helpful either to get some examples from someone of a similar role. I found that to be hugely helpful.
I do the same thing.
Yeah, okay, good. Phew. So when we talk about like what would need to be included in a job description, you typically include a little bit about the company's culture, or would that go in the listing? Can you describe to me a little bit about like how a job description might be the same or differ from what you might post online for a job?
Sometimes it depends on your practices as well. So a lot of companies use their job posting as their job description, and they can be one and the same. Sometimes companies like to have employees sign off on job descriptions, and that's why you might have a separate one. But if you're just starting out, I don't think there's a need for two separate documents. But I would do a summary of your practice and what you're looking for. If you have core values, or if you want to talk about your culture, that's always great. And then what are their requirements for the job? So you have to post not necessarily what the ideal candidate looks like, but what you need for the job. So what are those specific requirements that somebody has to fulfill on the job? So if it's, answering the phone, that has to be on there on the job description.
Okay, so that when the person reads, they're going to have a good idea of what's expected of them.
Yeah. Right.
Okay. Now you talked about where to post, and you mentioned like Monster.com. I know you're going to laugh, but like when we first hired our first receptionist, we posted on Craigslist, and the thing was we had thousands of people respond, and that was its own bag of worms that we can talk about of like how do you filter through that. But you mentioned today really leveraging your network, which seems to make a lot of sense. So can you talk a little bit more about how a practitioner might do that? Is it their patient base that they might reach out to, or what other networks might they reach out to try to find the right candidate?
LinkedIn is a great network. We use LinkedIn all the time. It's a great place to actually focus your search, so you can actually look for the specific skill set, and you can upgrade your LinkedIn membership to search without paying a lot of money to search for other people and reach out to them specifically. So you're really honing your search. And then I would reach out to the practitioners in your network too. Maybe they've hired similar positions or they know somebody. If you're comfortable reaching out to your patient base, that might be a great place to start too.
I know a lot of docs that do, because that is kind of a culture fit. Like if you have patients that really fit into the culture, asking them, they might know someone who might jive in that area. And whether it's the patient themselves, which I know clinicians who've hired their patients, or it's someone that they know, it can be definitely a clue in, or at least building almost an advocacy team to help you promote the role.
Yeah, and people want a place where they feel like they're adding value and they want a purpose. And so if you can find somebody like that in your patient base that's already connected to what you do, you're halfway there.
That's probably a huge benefit of hiring in a naturopathic or integrative medicine practice. I know here at Emerson, that is a huge reason why people take the job here, is that they love what we do as a company, and they really believe in integrative medicine, and they believe in nutrition, and it really makes them want to be in this environment. I'm sure it'd be really similar for a lot of practitioners.
Yeah, I've joked with people before. It's very easy to get passionate about wellness and healthy living and making that connection. It's not very easy to get passionate about, other things
like auto parts or something like that.
Or auto parts and things like that.
Yeah, we're really lucky to be in the industry that we're in.
Yeah. Great.
Okay, so now you have a role posted, and I think generally the next step is you start to get responses, hopefully a lot of responses for this role. What would be the next step that someone would go through to help to discern who should move on into more of an interview phase? I mean, if you get 100 resumes, is there a quick way to go through them to check and see who you might want to move forward? And what's the process that you use, or that Beth, our recruiter, uses when she's going through those?
Yeah, so there are systems that you can implement that will actually auto-screen candidates, but they can get very costly. So a lot of, I would assume, smaller practitioner practices will just use email and Excel to track things. And use the gift that you have, your own two eyes, and screen through the resumes. Look for, you can ask pre-qualifying questions, so submit your resume with your what you're looking for salary, maybe what your career aspirations are, and things like that, and that can help you eliminate folks. If you're looking for people that have so many years of experience at one job and don't job hop, those are the things that kind of stand out for us. And then we look for matching skill set. So I would write down before you start looking at resumes what's important to you and what you're really looking for, and then start to screen through the resumes for that. I would also look for red flags as well, because there might be something in a resume that just doesn't make sense that you might want to talk to them about when you start to talk to them.
What are some of the red flags you might look for?
Missing dates, big gaps in employment. A lot of people have good reasons for gaps, but you can't get that from a resume, so you have to ask. There might be overlaps too, where they've got a couple of full-time jobs going at the same time, and that might be a concern for you if you want them dedicated to what you're doing, but they have a side job. It could be a challenge.
Okay, that's helpful. Now, is going through that screening process, one, I love the idea of asking other specific questions for the response. Like, you could almost request additional questions to be answered in a cover letter style format, right? Of, have you ever seen an integrative provider before, or something that might clue them into the knowledge of your business if that mattered to you. Or I love that idea to kind of ask more specific questions that you might ask on an interview, but that are so important. You don't want to get them done up front.
Right, and you can gauge their level of excitement about the position by how much time they put into a cover letter.
That's a good point.
And if they tie it into what you're doing and your practice, then you start to build that connection right away.
Yeah, cool. And is looking through that initial screen something that you'd recommend that the practice owner do themselves, or something that they could have a member of their team do with certain parameters?
Depends on how much of that control you want to have for yourself. I think at some point you need to make sure you're taking ownership of the hire, because like I said, culture fit is really important, so you need to feel comfortable with them. And that could be that you're doing the initial interview and not the initial screen. So if you have an executive assistant or an office manager that you're comfortable doing that, or delegating that task to.
Okay. Cool. Okay, so now we're at the point where we're ready to interview. Now, this I know could vary hugely depending upon the amount of time you have to devote, but can you describe the interview process? Is it I know here we do phone screens, and what do we cover in a phone screen, and then we do more in person. Is that the right approach for smaller businesses too? And really, how many candidates might you want to put through each of those processes to start?
I think it's still important to do the phone screen, because you can eliminate candidates pretty quickly. It's harder to do that in person when they're sitting next to you and you've scheduled an hour with them.
I've been there. I'm sure you've been there a lot more times.
And you just know this isn't working out. Where over the phone you can say, okay, these are my elimination questions, and it might be, this is what I'm willing to pay for the position. Is that something you're comfortable with? And they can say no, and you can say, okay, well, this probably isn't the right opportunity at this time. Or if you require specific hours, I know sometimes practitioners work later nights or weekends, and you might want to make sure that the person's comfortable with those hours, because you're going to need that support then.
Great point.
That's a great opportunity to eliminate that, so that you're not bringing somebody in and having that conversation while they're in person and then eliminating them.
That's great. Great. And about how many candidates would you normally put through a phone screen? Everybody that looks good to you, or is there a sweet spot?
It really depends on what you're getting for resumes. There are times where you might get 5 or 10, you want to talk to all of them, and there are times where you might get 300. It just depends on the time of the year. We also find we get most of our resumes on Friday, Saturday, Sunday. So if you're posting a job, posting it on Friday is really important, because it'll go to the top of the list.
That's a great tip. So that's a good takeaway tip, is do your postings on Fridays. That way people actually, that makes sense. So if people are working, then it's probably weekends that they're going to be looking for something different.
Or they're talking to family members at a cookout or things, in the summer, that stuff starts to pick up. So they might say, hey, I saw this job opportunity. I thought it would be great for you.
Yeah, that's a great point. So let's talk a little bit about in-person interviews. Now, I have a lot of questions about this. I think starting with, are there key questions you should ask, or what is it that you really most want to gauge like, let's talk about culture fit maybe to start. How can you gauge if someone's a good fit for the culture? Is it that they are easy to have a conversation with, or are there other key things that you might look for?
The interview is so important for you, but also very important for the candidate. And we call it the candidate experience, and making sure that every candidate has a wonderful experience, regardless of whether we liked them or we're going to hire them or not. We want them to leave feeling good about Emerson. And I think that's really important to think about what's your candidate experience, and if you're scheduling a time, make sure you're there and you're available for that time and you're not keeping them waiting. I think that's really important. When you're sitting down with the candidate and interviewing them, keep it job specific. So there are lots of questions that you can ask and lots of questions you can't ask legally. So you can't ask anything that's protected. So age, race, sex, sexual preference, if they have children, things like that, you can't ask those questions. So keep it very job specific. Can you work these hours? Can you accept this salary? And then as far as the job skills and the culture, think about behavioral questions that you can ask. So tell me about a time when X. Tell me about a time when you dealt with a difficult customer. I'm sure, you may have every once in a while an unhappy patient. Maybe they have to change the appointment date or something. Tell me about a time you've had to deal with something like that and how you reacted and what was the end result. And you can get a gauge of their behavior and their personality by asking behavioral questions.
I've used that a lot and found it to be really telling of, like, can you give me an experience when you have had to do blank? And I definitely find getting people to talk about what they did versus what they would do gives you so much more of a perspective on, like, who they are, how they're going to be in that role. So that's a really great question, is thinking about, whether, one example for a clinician that I remember asking is like, okay, so you're going to be the only person at the front desk, or maybe you're not, but there's a lot of people waiting, and you might have, you were in the middle of an email when the phone rang, and then you're on the phone when a patient comes up to the window. Tell me how you handle that. How what's an example where you've had to juggle, and what's the right thing to do in your opinion? And those types of questions you really tell, how people are going to behave at that time. Yeah.
And I wouldn't judge it on just if they're able to converse effectively with you, because there are people that are introverted that don't interview well, but they'll give you the right answers, and they may be your best employee.
So let's talk a little bit about that with kind of those personality pieces. Some people interview well, some people don't. We've met people who are really kind of great at the self-sales, I would call it, that don't have the skill set behind, and it's really easy to kind of fall for that because I think culture is such an important piece. What are the things that you might do to verify a skill set before you hire someone?
So you can, in the interview, you can dig in deeper. So do a deeper dive. So if they tell you, yes, I've done Excel, I rate myself a 7 on a scale of 1 to 10, okay, well, what does that mean? Tell me about the most difficult spreadsheet you had to create in Excel. Can you produce it? Can you show me? We've also done interview tests, if you call it that.
Thank God it was before I was hired. I mean, after I was hired here, I would have never passed.
So we have, for different positions, we have things that they have to do in that position. So they may have to, put together a proposal, if it's a marketing position, they might have to write a press release and show it to us, just to prove they have that skill set. References are also a great way to really dig in, but you have to dig in because nobody's going to give you a bad reference. So you have to really talk to them about, give me an example of their work that they produced. What was something that you were really pleased with, and what was something that they had to go back and edit?
Okay. That's a great question. I think that's a tricky thing, is getting kind of the truth, pulling the truth out. Any other tips with references on maybe what some good questions are to really get the truth out? Because I think you're right. I've been on a lot of reference calls where people have called me to be a reference, and they start on the surface, but I've had one or two where at the end I was like, wow, I really disclosed a lot more than I would have expected to on that call. Any tips and tricks when you're checking references? Because I think that can be such a great way to get a third-party view.
I think the references are also a good sanity check. So if there's something that's really nagging at you from the interview, I liked this person, but right? There's this one thing. Are they going to be really good in stressful situations? Maybe that's the thing you want to follow up on. Check with the reference. Give me an example. Use the same kind of behavioral interview question, but twist it. So, tell me about a time where they were put under a lot of pressure. How did they react? How did they respond? How did they come to you? And how did they face the customer?
Cool. Okay. Now, I know we don't have all day to talk about hiring. I wish we did, because I feel like there's so much more we could cover. But so now we've identified the right candidate. Can you just quickly walk us through what are the next steps? How do you put together an offer? What kinds of things might you think about in an offer? And then maybe a little bit about the onboarding process.
Sure. So the offer letter is an opportunity for you to state what you're giving them. So if there's compensation, obviously, and then any kind of benefits package. Most states are employee at will states, so that means that they can leave for any reason and you can terminate them for any reason other than something protected. So you want to make sure that there's that employment at will clause in the offer letter so it doesn't look like a contract. If you're going to write up a contract and have a contract for someone, you should have legal look at it.
Okay. And that's, I think, a really important piece. So when you make an offer, it should be written down.
Yes.
Okay. These are the basics I think a lot of us are dealing with, right? So maybe finding a template online, or maybe we can think about providing a template that we can share with you too.
I'm happy to do that.
Yeah, that way you can kind of get a generic template of what an offer might include. Yeah. Cool. And then what about when someone comes in to their first day? Any special considerations other than making sure you're available to them?
If you think about the first day of school, it's very similar to the first day at a new job. And so put yourself in their shoes. What would you want walking in? People want to feel welcome. They want to feel comfortable. There's anxiety. There's nervousness about the first day. You don't know anybody other than the people you've interviewed with. And so figure out a nice way to welcome them. Taking them to lunch is always nice. Having something nice at their desk. For my team, I like to do a little plant and a card signed by everybody just to show them that we're here and we're excited to have you here as well. Somebody makes a decision to stay or leave a position within the first 3 weeks.
No way, that's amazing.
Yeah, it is.
Wow.
So those first impressions really count, and whatever you can do. I mean, you don't have to throw them a party, although that would be great. Just making them feel welcome and showing them the basics. Where's the bathroom? Where's the copier? How do I use this? What's the login for my computer? And having all their tools ready for them so they can jump right in because they want to learn and they're hungry and excited to get started.
You can tell that Michelle and I are both mommies of small children because we can compare everything to some kind of childhood experience like the first day of school. It's great. Awesome. Well, any final tips for the providers that are listening about hiring? I think we've covered so much. Anything else that we've either forgotten or like if you had one take-home point?
I think hiring, especially a new position, it's scary. And, especially as a practitioner, maybe this is your first time into becoming a boss or becoming a manager. But you're not in it alone. There's a ton of resources out there. There's the Society for HR Management, which is a great resource. And there's also a lot of staffing agencies out there that you could utilize. And I know there's the national industry job boards too. So for any natural positions, those are out there as well.
Awesome.
So just Google and you'll find something.
And I remember reading the phrase hire slow, fire fast. You've heard that one. And I think generally we keep people on our teams that aren't a fit much longer than we probably should. I've experienced that in some instances. And likewise, sometimes we are so desperate to get someone in a role that we jump the gun and bring someone in that's really not the right fit. So I think that would be my suggestion, is just remember that hire slow part of the hire slow, fire fast. Make sure it really is the right fit for your business and for your practice. Because this person, especially in a small business environment, every hire counts.
And they can have a big impact.
Yeah, a huge impact, definitely. Well, thank you, Michelle, so much for spending the time. I think you had probably 100 fantastic tips that people could take. So thanks for spending the time with me today.
Thank you.
Be sure to check us out if you haven't already subscribed to the Best Practice series. Now's the time to do that. You're not going to want to miss out on either the past ones that we've had, but we have a lot coming up in the future. And if you loved what you learned from Michelle, she's also going to be helping us out with how to coach your current employees to really make sure you're getting the most out of every valued person in your building. Take care. Have a great day.